Welcome everyone. The webinar will begin shortly. We invite you to connect with the campaign for grade level reading on social media. Use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learn from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded and shared with you afterwards. Okay, once again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I will be behind the scenes helping to produce this webinar. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself in the chat box at the bottom of the screen. We also encourage you to post questions in the Q&A box. We will dedicate the last 20 minutes to respond to your questions. This webinar is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook Live, and a link to the recording will be emailed to all who registered. All resources that you see shared as links in the chat will be compiled and shared in the same follow-up email to all webinar registrants. Finally, we'll be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during Q&A and highly encourage you to respond. I would also like to invite you to join us to some of our upcoming webinars. Later this afternoon, we have a session co-sponsored by Parent-Teacher Home Visits, which will be at 3 p.m. Next week, we will have an exciting doubleheader, starting with a peer exchange session featuring the first 10 model, followed by a session exploring the latest data on student achievement during COVID-19 and some of the districts and areas that were able to beat the trends. We hope you will join us again on October 4th for a session co-sponsored by Foundations, Inc., featuring their REACH program. Registration links for all of these sessions will be posted in the chat box, and we hope you can join us. Joining you now is Sarah Torian, Senior Consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thanks so much, Sierra, and welcome. Sorry about that, unmuting now. Thank you so much, Sierra, and welcome everyone. We're so glad that you could all join us for today's Funder to Funder conversation, co-sponsored by the Overdeck Family Foundation, as we explore how re-envisioning of the traditional school staffing model can be a critical part of our collective efforts to better support students, teachers, and schools in the wake of the pandemic. As a Funder to Funder conversation, we will be joined today by 3 philanthropic leaders that are working at the local and national level, investing in differentiated staffing and other efforts to empower teachers and school leaders in ways that improve both teacher efficacy and student outcomes. After we hear from these funders, we'll also have the opportunity to hear from leaders of 3 of the innovative models that those funders are investing in, and a classroom teacher that is a part of one of them. These panelists will discuss what impact their models are having on schools and student success, and the role that philanthropy, especially local philanthropy with its deep local knowledge, earned credibility, and trusting relationships can play in advancing these teacher and student-focused innovations. And to begin that conversation, I am incredibly honored to welcome and introduce our moderator for today, Karen Hawley-Miles of Education Resource Strategies, or ERS. As president and CEO of ERS, Karen has worked intensively with school systems nationwide to analyze and improve their funding systems, school-level resource use, and human capital and professional development systems. ERS helps systems restructure teaching to encourage individual and team effectiveness, redesign their funding systems, create new schools that organize talent, time, and technology to maximize learning, and develop powerful school turnaround strategies. Welcome, Karen. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Sarah. We are all so happy to be with you for this really important conversation. So I'm not going to start with a bunch of data as I typically do. Instead, I'm going to just say, I know you're here because you've seen it all over the news, that teachers are dissatisfied, that there's turnover. There are strikes happening even so early in this school year. So instead, I'm going to take just a few minutes to define what we mean by differentiated staffing. It's not a term that's widely used, and where it fits in the landscape of reimagining the teaching profession, and a little bit why it's so important, although that's going to be a lot of what the panelists are really talking about. So if we go to the next chart, it's no surprise that teachers aren't happy. They've been in the same job. We've had the same job for teachers for well over a century. maybe even 2 centuries if we wanted to go that far. It's a one-size-fits-all workload that doesn't change regardless of individual strengths or experiences. There's limited time as a teacher to go to a doctor's appointment, to take a little break, let alone for meaningful collaboration with any kind of support from folks who know how to teach your content. There's a rigid schedule that leaves no time for relationships with students or providing extra support, and no time for reflection about how to improve teaching or just how things are going. Teachers work as isolated solo practitioners, and they have had stagnant pay for the last couple of decades. That doesn't change regardless of what role teachers play, how hard they work, what subject they teach, or how difficult their role is. So it's not particularly surprising that we have burnout, that we have turnover that especially affects early career teachers and early career teachers in our highest need schools, that we have persistent shortages in our harder to staff roles, which includes certain subjects like special ed, but also the hardest hit schools by the pandemic. We have strained capacity to sustain the work in the crisis, and we have inequitable distribution of the best teachers across schools and within schools. So what we need is a new vision for teaching. If we go to the next slide, the panelists and funders in this session are part of a coalition that's coming together around thinking about a new vision for the teaching job that tries to make it these things in the right-hand corner: dynamic, rewarding, collaborative, sustainable, and diverse. All things that, of course, are the goals we would want to strive for. We wanted to get further to get more into the how, because we feel like that's been the barrier over the past over the decades that we've all been working on this particular topic. And so the vision begins with expert lead teams of teacher educators who share the work. This isn't something we made up. It's based on research about how teachers thrive, what they want, and what keeps them in the work, and how instruction works best for students who need it most. And that begins with teams of teachers who bring different aspects of expertise to the work and support each other in figuring out how to get each student to the highest levels. It has these pieces on either end, the blue and the purple that you see there, where we're talking about how do we get great potential teachers into the pipeline who bring a diversity of experiences, race, and background. And then where we provide support to new teachers so that they're great, so they provide good instruction from the beginning, and they have lower workloads enabling them to learn how to do this. Jumping over to the purple piece, we have really thinking about leadership roles that enable teachers to stay and grow, continue to grow in their learning and stay working with students. These are pieces that funders and reformers have been working on for decades. But the piece in the middle, the green, is about the core of the teacher work. That's what most teachers are experiencing. And that really hasn't changed in many decades. And the pieces that need to be addressed in there, we feel, are competitive compensation. Again, the research says teachers need to have a comparable compensation. They're not in it for the money. They're in it for doing great work, being effective with students. And so we need to organize in ways that enable that to happen. But a sustainable workload is critical. And that is about time for collaboration. That's about time for reflection and relationship. And then ongoing learning and opportunities to learn directly connected with the work that they're doing. So this is about tackling the core. Beautiful vision, right? But how in the world do we do it? We've had the same model, the same staffing structures, and the same schedules for decades. So it's time to rethink the core of the job, to redistribute roles and redistribute compensation. We are in a moment of influx of resources and funds, but those funds are going to go away, leaving the schools and districts with the highest needs with less than they've ever had, because we also have declining enrollment and huge increase in needs for the coming years. So we're going to have to think differently about how we organize, and that's where differentiated roles come in. So what do we mean, if you go to the next slide, when we say differentiated roles? So This means teachers, as I've said, that work in teams and share the work of planning instruction, teams that include teaching residents and early career teachers, teacher leaders who are selected from the most effective educators and have time for planning, observation, and coaching. This is not something that's just added on to their job with a tiny little stipend that goes on top. Community educators and partners that bring specialized expertise and programming to schools, remote and hybrid roles that enable a different kind of flexibility and enable educators to participate off hours in different ways and supporting students in new ways that we haven't seen at scale. Educators who need to scale back can take part-time roles, can share jobs, can play one of these remote roles, and parents, high school students, and other non-traditional sorts of educators can engage. Feel like this is super important for this audience who are bringing outside partnerships to support reading. There are so many ways in which these new models can of organizing staff can embrace a much fuller support of students, especially around reading. And so last, I'll end with a picture because they say it's worth 1,000 words. And this picture comes from Brent Madden at Education Next, who you hear more about. But really what we're talking about is moving away from the picture on the top that is one teacher with 25-ish students. It varies by grade. To a variety of different ways of organizing. On the left-hand side, you can see to this, which is a team of teachers that is caring for 75 students, perhaps all at the same grade level. That includes a teacher leader with huge expertise in how to do this, in how to teach, but also in how to organize teams. With some student teachers or some resident teachers. MLFTC stands for Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College, where Brent is doing this work in concert with Arizona. And then with two other kinds of educators that are there, surrounded by other specialists, all working together as a team. The chart on the right shows a different way of organizing this that might combine grades, but still has the same notion of folks working together in teams that include other educators, outside partners, and so on. So let's dig in and hear a little bit more about how this is playing out in different places and why the funders that are here are so excited about it. So I want to introduce my funder panelists, who are also partners in this work in terms of just their thoughts and their experience and all that they bring, the energy and inspiration that they bring to this work. So Stephanie Banchero is the director of the Education and Economic Mobility Program at the Joyce Foundation in Chicago, where she works to advance policies to ensure young people of color and those in marginalized communities have effective, diverse K-12 educators and smooth pathways from high school through college and the workforce. Irene Chen, who is Associate Program Officer at Overdeck Family Foundation in the Exceptional Educator portfolio. She previously worked with a technology startup where she partners with K-12 schools and districts to use data in making critical decisions to support student outcomes. And then Shane Spalton, who supports the Charles and Lynn Schusterman Family Philanthropy's efforts to improve K-12 education across the US, leading Schusterman's support to school systems with a particular focus on K-8 literacy and teacher pipeline efforts. Previously, Shane served as the Chief Human Resource Officer for Denver Public Schools, who has pioneered many of these ideas under her leadership. So it'll be wonderful to hear more about that. So that's incredible to have these three on here to help us. And we're ready to dig into some questions for them. Beautiful. So I'm going to start with Shane and ask you, Shane, what do you see as the potential of differentiated staffing models and why is it so important right now?
Yeah, terrific. Well, thank you, Karen, and just really grateful to be here and grateful for the chance to have this conversation with such a terrific set of folks. I would start by just reinforcing a point that you made, Karen, in your introduction, which is that we were barraged this summer and this fall by a series of headlines around teacher dissatisfaction, teacher shortages, the struggles that schools were having getting up and started. But this isn't a new issue. This is an issue, as you pointed out, that has been brewing for decades. I think what's really happened through the course of the pandemic is that the pandemic's made very clear that the way in which schools are structured to support teachers and students simply is not working. As student needs have grown more intense, as the teaching job has grown more complex, as preferences in the workforce have changed, we have not, to the point you made, Karen, made any kinds of changes to the ways our schools are structured to support the success of kids and of teachers. So as you mentioned, Karen, several years ago in Denver, we sought to break apart this notion of the one teacher, one classroom model. And we did that by elevating a new set of roles for teacher leaders across schools, across our districts, that would be responsible for providing support and coaching to individual teachers on their team. It created opportunities for all of our teachers to work within new dynamic team structures. And what we learned through a bunch of that work was two things. One is that those structures could be incredibly important to drive increased student achievement, particularly in areas like literacy, and it could have a lasting impact on schools and school cultures. And that's really what we saw as the primary benefit. New teacher leaders in their roles told us that they would have left the profession if it wasn't for some of the opportunities that were created by these new structures. And teachers within the teams told us that they had never felt that supported ever before. To this day, we did a lot of work around our people and our talent structures in Denver. To this day, I see this work around school staffing structures, teacher leadership, as some of the most significant work that we did. The last thing I would say is that while the pandemic, I think, didn't create the crisis, it has created a unique urgency and opportunity, I think, at this moment. First, the needs of our students are greater than they've ever been before coming out of the pandemic. I think some of the recent data that we've seen just reinforces the importance of really focusing schools, leaders, and teachers on the task of learning for kids. This discussion of teacher shortages, burnouts, and significant drops in the number of individuals who are interested in teaching as a career has also made clear that our business as usual kind of solutions to addressing those issues aren't going to work anymore. Never before have I heard in my conversations with district leaders now, as they're talking about their plans for COVID recovery, so many district leaders talking seriously about the opportunity to restructure schools and restructure roles. That's what I think the opportunity is right now.
Thank you so much, Shane. Irene or Stephanie, do you have anything to add to that setup before we get on to the next question?
Yeah, thank you, Karen and Shane, for setting the context here. I agree with Shane. This is not a new problem. However, a lot of the recent trends that we're seeing, 18% of Americans would, according to a recent poll, recommend teaching as a profession, and that's really troubling for us, as well as the sort of decades-long decline in teacher prep enrollment. So definitely a lot of challenges and a lot of opportunities in this work. And at Overdeck Family Foundation, we've been investing in different types of these models over the last 6 years, and agree with Shane that there's some really early promising results about academic outcomes for kids, as well as the secondary benefits for teacher satisfaction and retention that we think are so important. So our hypothesis on our end, and what we think the opportunity is that the more satisfied teachers are, the more likely they will be to stay in their roles, and the better they'll be able to improve those student outcomes. We also think that there's a lot of opportunities for these models to help understaffed schools that are looking for sustainable solutions during a time when there's a fiscal cliff coming up, so that they can really prioritize focusing on the staff that are already within schools and rethinking those roles versus potentially hiring completely new teachers. So I'm really excited to hear from some of our providers later on talk about some of the possibilities of that model as well.
Karen, can I just add one quick thing? So double 3-time click on everything that Shane and Irene have said. And I'm honored to be here with them because they're really the leaders in the space. But one thing they want to triple click on is that the workforce looks different now, just like how we all are working. Like I'm at my home, obviously. So there's a lot of opportunities to potentially work from home or do hybrid work in the employment space. And so I think we need to think about what does that mean for teachers when there's so many other opportunities where they could potentially not teach and do hybrid work or work from home. So thinking about how can we make this more attractive when we know the workforce is going to look different post-COVID.
Love that, Stephanie. So I'm actually going to keep it with you and ask you, why did you decide to invest in these organizations specifically?
Yeah, so
into your overall investment strategy.
Yeah, so I would say, I mean, the first part of that is easy. These are like the top organizations in the space, the top thinkers. Opportunity Culture and Teach Plus, Joyce has invested in them for a long time. They have been in this space for a long time doing like frontline, cutting edge rethinking. Opportunity Culture has a ton of deep evidence on student success, which we're evidence-based, so I love that. Teach Plus also has evidence of their great work. The other thing I love about Teach Plus is that this is unique in that it brings the teacher perspective. So what do teachers think teaching should look like? Obviously, that's important. And then finally, Brent's group, the Next Education Workforce. To me, this was sort of a new model, super exciting. I love the co-teaching and student-centered learning. But one thing that I really love about this is its deep connection to teacher prep, because I believe that ultimately to solve these issues, teacher prep and districts have to work together. And then just quickly on how does it fit into our strategy. So we are focused mainly in the Midwest states. We work on public policy and systems change. We're focused on making sure that young kids of color and in underserved communities have teachers and great teachers and principals. And we're seeing burnout. We're seeing teachers leaving the profession. We don't have enough bilingual teachers in the states we work. We don't have enough special ed teachers. And I think some of these new models can help solve some of these problems. It's not the only solution, but I think it's a big part of the solution. And one thing I would push on is that we also need to think about what are the policy barriers that might be stifling some of this innovation.
Mm-hmm. Great. Anybody else have it? So yeah, let's move to understand, Irene, why you all are investing in this now, if there's anything you would add.
Similar to what Stephanie is sharing, we care deeply about the evidence base for a lot of this work. So you'll see that in some of the organizations that we are supporting in the strategy. At the Overdeck Family Foundation, we're a national funder focused on both enhancing the education inside and outside of the classroom. My Exceptional Educators portfolio is specifically focused on ensuring that great teachers can stay in the classroom if they want to, by providing those opportunities for leadership and advancement. And as a foundation, we are focused on evidence-based, cost-effective solutions, which means we're supporting interventions that are closest to the outcomes that we care about for kids, but also that we're focused on those with demonstrated impact wherever possible. Stephanie brought up teacher prep, which is really important, and our portfolio has previously focused on that entire teacher pipeline from pre-service to in-service, funding things like teacher recruitment, teacher prep, and residencies. At the end of 2020, we began evaluating which of our strategies were most impactful and found that focusing on in-service, for us at least, would allow us to make the greatest amount of impact in the shortest possible timeline. And we're really excited about all these solutions that are really focused on the teacher retention piece, resolving what the familiar analogy of that leaky bucket that we've all been talking about recently. So the current strategy that we launched in 2022 is focused on differentiated staffing, is also based on what we've learned over our investments over the years. And some of those key lessons we think make differentiated staffing a really timely investment aligned to those priority outcomes that we have as a foundation. So first of all, we've learned that it's possible to be creative with staffing to extend the reach of really excellent teachers. I think you can see that really clearly, like Stephanie said, in the work of public impacts of opportunity culture. We've also learned that co-teaching residency models have shown positive effects when compared to some of those one-to-one teacher to classroom models. And that makes us really excited about the potential for the work of an organization like ASU Next Education Workforce. And we have also seen that this work can be cost neutral. Public impact has demonstrated that not only can it be impactful, but it can be done within existing school budgets. And finally, while this work isn't new, history has taught us that it requires really favorable conditions to scale. And that's why we're really excited about the work of an organization like Teach Plus, which can coach those teacher leaders to advocate for those leadership opportunities that matter most for teachers themselves.
Great. So before I turn it to Shane, I hope you don't mind, I'm going to put a little twist on this question for you. So Irene talked about, how this was sustainable. Actually, I saw a little chat from somebody talking about how this looks similar to the professional development schools, which I studied in school that were sort of new in Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania, and all of that. My question to you is, why are you so interested in these organizations right now in this moment when this stuff has been around? We've had pieces and parts of this around, over the last few days, few decades, really. What's different about these organizations and the work that they're doing?
Yeah, what I would say, Karen, is that it's really the opportunity created by the moment. So all of what we talked about in terms of the way in which broadly, we're getting an understanding of what some of these challenges are in schools, and school districts are starting to lean into this issue and realizing they've got a crisis to respond to and are looking for important solutions. They need help. So these solutions aren't, they may seem obvious in some ways, but they're not clear or easy. And I think what I've really appreciated about all of these organizations is that what all of them have been focused on is the development of really concrete tools, resources, strategies for systems to use as they're implementing these kinds of changes. So resources that help them think about what these various roles can look like within schools, how to think about supporting and training those who are in new roles within schools, how to think about soliciting opinions, ideas, partnership from teachers and leaders as they're doing this work to drive some of the very significant culture change that needs to happen, and how to think about resource allocation in very different ways than systems are used to thinking about it.
Karen, can I add one quick thing on that? One thing I think the moment is part of the reason why well, at least for Joyce, we're focused on it right now. But also, I think during COVID, parents got a very deep understanding of what schooling looked like. A, because they were doing it, or B, because they were looking at it on Zoom. And I think just sort of parents feel much more activated around what schooling looks like. And there's a whole movement around tutors. And I just feel like there's so many more people in the system right now thinking about it, that it just creates sort of a prime opportunity to start, supporting and sort of pushing new things.
That's beautiful. I'm going to stick with you, but Stephanie, and actually ask you to think a little bit about this question. Districts have a lot of money right now, or at least that's the narrative, that there's a lot of money flowing in. Why do funders need to be involved in promoting this right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I would say just a couple things generally about sort of funding and how we think about it is, first, funders can be risk capital. It's hard sometimes for government to take a risk on things. Shane notwithstanding, she was a very innovative talent lead, but it can be hard for government to take risk. And some people could see this as risky, so we can provide risk capital. Also, we can sometimes get money out the door quicker and do things much more quickly than what you would have to go through in sort of a government procurement system. And then lastly, I would say there are things that we can do the government can't do at all. Not can't do it all, but we can help build a movement. We can convene people. Like there's a role for funders to bring people together and help sort of supercharge what's happening. And I think it's sort of incumbent upon us to do that now, even though there may be a lot of money in the system, which is sort of debatable. There's a role for funders outside of that extra money.
Great, and I just want to follow up on that. Just that last point there that funders can either create competition between providers and technical folks, or they can actively promote collaboration. And you three have been pioneers in, the supporting the four of us on, who are part of this panel that are the providers to collaborate. And so I'm wondering if any of you could talk about what's behind your thinking around, why would you need to spend money to support collaboration? I don't know, Irene, do you want to kick us off on that a little bit? And then Shane has to add, they've been pioneers with supporting this kind of collaboration.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And honestly, my hat's off to Stephanie, who has been funding directly that coalition to improve the teaching profession, Karen, that you're referencing.
I know, believe me.
That partnership across the organizations. I would say the Overdyke Family Foundation focuses on supporting organizations that are seeding the field with new ideas. So like Stephanie has talked about, the speed at which we can move, perhaps not as fast as some of our grantees might like, it's faster in terms of supporting innovation in this space. So we care about ways that we can seed the field with new ideas to address those issues and challenges. So the way that we think about collaboration, to your point, is that we should be encouraging organizations to think about solutions that are addressing these immediate needs, but then also think about longer term sustainability. And we think by bringing folks together, thought practitioners in this space together, they're more able to learn more quickly what's working and what's not, right? And so I think that that's a really important piece of the coalition network. And frankly, I think the other piece to our funding that we care deeply about as a foundation is the importance of funding research to understand what works and to encourage districts and leaders to be adopting those evidence-based models. And I think collectively as a group, we can surface some really important questions that I think can be answered more easily when there's lots of folks coming up with those models and those tools and resources that Shane was mentioning earlier as well.
Yeah. Would you, Shane or Stephanie, especially, would you add to, why does this cost money? This collaboration?
Yeah, the two things I'd add would just build on Irene and Stephanie's comments, which is first on the collaboration piece. We've seen tremendous opportunities that funders can create by bringing folks together. So we are doing work across a number of school systems right now around K-8 literacy. It's been for many of those systems the first time since the pandemic started where they've been able to get together with folks from across their team and think with providers about how they're approaching their next few years of work around K-8 literacy, and a really unique opportunity for teams that sometimes can be siloed in systems like your talent office and your academic office to really be working together to think about how you move what the ultimate goal is, which is student learning. So I think there are just a lot of opportunities that are created by how projects are structured or how work is formed. And I know that's a real focus among many of the organizations on this call, is how you do integrate various offices across the district in that work. And then the final thing is I would just double click on Irene's point around the importance of this kind of funding to keep a focus on the long-term horizon. I think what we've seen in systems is just incredible pressure to spend money on very short-term, very important urgent needs that are emerging in districts right now. And I think funders can play a really important role in, really laying the foundation, creating the evidence and the case for these larger, what I think of as infrastructure investments that districts may need going forward. So as districts are being kind of barraged by these political pressures, sometimes philanthropic funding can create some space to think about some of these kind of long-term innovations in a different way.
Yeah, we're seeing that play out so much in the districts that we work with. Stephanie, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Just one really quick thing. One of the reasons I think for collaboration, other than the obvious reasons we've spoken about, is like it is going to take more than one solution. It's not like we're going to have one solution and that's the solution that every district is going to work. All of these people that you're going to hear from now do it very differently, and I think we need a lot of different things out there. And so I don't really see that there's competition. I mean, maybe they might feel competition, but we don't see it as competition. We see it as like there's a lot of good ideas. We need a lot of good ideas. Let's share the good ideas.
Perfect segue. So let's hear from those good ideas, and you'll see that there are a lot of things in common about what they're doing, which I've kind of shared in general, and then the how and the specifics of how they're doing that are shaping out and need to be, really specific. So let's switch to the innovator educator group. Beautiful. So I'm going to start by introducing Brian Hassel, who is co-president at Public Impact, where he works with school systems all over the country with nonprofit providers, public agencies, and foundations that are working to make dramatic improvement in K-12 education. Most relevant to this, he leads Opportunity Culture Initiative, which he will describe in more detail when we get to that. And he's a recognized expert on teacher and principal effectiveness, school funding systems, and all sorts of things related to K-12. Kira Jones is the Chief Executive Officer of Teach Plus, where she works to develop and advance teachers as leaders in education policy and practice, build a more equitable and excellent education for students through change, innovation, and elevate the teacher leadership movement and profession. Prior to joining Teach Plus, Kira was a senior vice president for Teach for America. And then finally, then we have Yuri Diana, who is our educator. She's the instructional lead teacher at Sunset High School's English department in Dallas. She's a distinguished master teacher, she's a Teacher of Excellence Initiative Campus Expert, a Dallas ISD Ambassador, and a Teach Plus Fellow, which is why we're so lucky to have her here. And then Brent Madden is Executive Director of the Next Education Workforce. He collaborates with colleagues across Arizona State University, K-12 educators, and the community to redesign models of schooling based on teams of educators with distributed expertise. Prior to coming to ASU, Brent founded Teacher Squared, which was a national center dedicated to increasing collaboration among teacher prep institutions. So with that, I really want to dig in to give people a sense of, what's going on, what specifically about this. So I'm going to invite you to describe your models. So I'm going to start with Brian to have you share what you are doing to empower educators and rethink this traditional staffing model.
Great, thank you, Karen. Thanks for all your leadership on this. And it's amazing to be part of the panel with all these other innovators and the funders that have been so important to this work. So thanks to all of you too. So let me give a brief description of Opportunity Culture, which is a school model that was developed under the leadership of Emily Askew-Hassel, who's the other co-president of Public Impact. And it's now in use in more than 500 schools in 10 states. And it's a model that has really two big goals. One is to reach all students, not just a fraction, with excellent teaching consistently. And the other one is to offer all educators the kind of profession that Karen described at the outset. So what happens in Opportunity Culture is that teachers join small teaching teams, 3 to 8 teachers, think a grade level or 2 in an elementary school or a subject department in a middle or high school. And then that team is led by a multi-classroom leader, or MCL. And this is a teacher who previously achieved high growth of the learning of their students and has leadership competencies, and then becomes the full leader of that team. What does that mean to be the full leader? Well, it means they meet with their team for several hours a week for collaborative time where they plan for lessons, they practice, they look at student data together, they figure out how to adjust instruction. It means going into their team teachers' classrooms at least a couple of times per week to model, to co-teach, to observe. It means continuing to teach kids. These are still teachers, both in their own classrooms and in their team teachers' classrooms. And it means earning more. MCLs average about 20% above what they would earn on the salary schedule around the country. So it's a substantial pay bump for taking on this big responsibility. And then what does it mean for the team teachers? Well, their job changes too. They get much more support on the job. They have much more time to collaborate with their peers and learn together. They can focus on their strengths in a team. And in some of the models, which I can talk more about later, they can earn more than normal for being part of one of these teams. And then finally, I'd say this model also fundamentally changes the principal's role. Instead of somehow trying to manage 30, 40, or 50 people, they become the leader of a team of leaders. And they can focus on helping each multi-classroom leader be as effective as possible. So that's the quick overview. Karen, I'll turn it back to you. We'll talk more as we go forward.
Great. Brent, can you give a quick overview of what you are working on?
Love to, Karen. Thank you. And again, debt of gratitude to everyone here. And to follow Brian is really apropos, I think, in so many ways, because I feel like we've been following Brian and his leadership and the leadership of he and Emily in Opportunity Culture for a really long time. You know, the work that we're doing at Arizona State University, we've been at it for about 5 years. So we're not super long into this work. And I said before you humbly, where we are right now, we're in about 10 school systems, impacting about 150 teams of teachers, about 50 schools. Most notably, Mesa Public Schools is the largest school district in the state of Arizona. And the superintendent there has made a bold proclamation. She said, we want 50% of our schools in Mesa Public Schools. This is kindergarten through 12th grade, you know, elementary, junior high, high school. We want 50% of our schools to be implementing these next education workforce team-based models. So what does that look like? You walk into one of the schools implementing these models. The first thing that I would say is there is no such thing as a single one model. There are a set of design tenets that when you empower educators to actually start to build with a team of colleagues, the learning environment, the schedule, the way that they're grouping and regrouping students, it's incredibly empowering experience for a team of educators to design that work. So you walk in and you might see 75 third graders together with a single teacher for a mini lesson, because that's the very best teacher on that team to deliver that instruction. And that lasts for about 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then they scatter across what used to be 4 individual classrooms. And then they're doing smaller group work or individual work or work on the computer, or that there's a set of high school students who want to be future teachers that are coming into that learning environment to help with reading or mathematics tutoring, but they've been upskilled in a really particular way, right? And so really at the end of the day, what are these models? It's teams of educators with distributed expertise. That last point's really important. Teams of educators with distributed expertise who, working together, can actually deliver deeper and more personalized learning than any of us. I'm a nationally board certified teacher sitting before you humbly. It's like super hard, right? Being a teacher is super hard. So do this together with a team, less isolating. And that we believe that the moment that you start to do that, it allows people to enter the profession differently. It allows them to specialize. It allows them to advance in lots of the same ways that Brian was just describing in terms of teacher leadership. And so there's a lot more that you can see. I think there's something dropped into the chat in terms of some of these models, just to give you inspiration. But it's really fun work, and I'm really lucky to be able to do this every day with many of the people on this screen here, to the point around collaboration.
Thanks, Brent. I would love for Kira to share your sort of unique vantage point in this work.
Sure. First of all, I'll follow suit and say it's apropos for me to follow Brent, given just the long history we have in the fact that I feel like I was witness to your own teacher leadership early on in your career, probably more than 2 decades ago, as you were beginning your career here in Louisiana when we were teaching together. So it's full circle to be on this panel with you and the rest of our esteemed panelists, and it's just really a pleasure to be here. So first things first, Teach Plus is a national equity-driven teacher leadership organization that believes that when we provide teachers with the opportunities to learn and to lead, and that's everywhere from the classroom to the Capitol, that lever can have an enormous impact on the conditions surrounding students and their opportunity, right? So we train teachers to serve as instructional and policy leaders in 12 states currently, and also work to shape the national conversation on equity and a reimagined teaching profession. So this conversation is incredibly exciting. We believe teachers want agency, they want respect, they want a chance to succeed. And we think a reimagined teaching profession and differentiated roles and leadership opportunities that give teachers both that agency and also enable students to thrive are integral to that conversation. We believe there's likely at least 3 significant barriers standing in the way of meaningful, scalable progress here. The first is lack of widely recognized examples of reimagined roles done well, although clearly there are incredible examples across this network, this coalition, and amongst our audience. There need to be many more. And we think that's an incredibly important part of the equation. We also think there's just a lack of public understanding still about the connection between teacher leadership and student success. Right, and that sort of creates some challenge. And finally, policy barriers to implementing innovative staffing roles, right? Collective bargaining challenges or others that sort of make it challenging to sort of accelerate these models and actually get them into practice fast enough, right? So we work towards addressing all 3 of those barriers in our strategy. We run outstanding teacher leadership programs in partnership with schools and districts that make it possible for teachers to have distributed leadership roles and have a greater impact on students, and also create proof of concepts, right? Create proof points that other districts and other schools can actually sort of see in action. We help to shape the national conversation about reimagined teaching roles through our reports, our media work, op-eds, and engagements with other thought leaders. And then finally, we run leadership programs to support teachers to advocate for the policies that advance a reimagined teaching profession and the conditions around our systems. And so, again, thrilled to be here and to be a part of what I think is such a timely conversation. I'm thinking back to, what Stephanie said in some of her remarks about just this moment, right? Obviously, we understand that some of these concepts, as you noted, Karen, are not new. And yet we believe there's a certain moment we face where we can really elevate these ideas even more. And we're excited about that opportunity.
Beautiful. So I'm actually we'll come back to some questions around financial sustainability and how this changes the structure of schooling. But I'm excited to move on to Yuri to hear her talk a little bit more about just her experience with it and the impact that she's had on her teaching and on the lives of students, just to reflect on that a little bit, and then we'll come back to some of the more structural kinds of questions.
Sure. Thank you, Karen, for having me. I am super appreciative just for this panel, that the conversation is happening. It is a joy to hear that we have organizations that are really invested in this. And this is one of the first steps, right? You guys have me here, an educator, someone with boots on the ground, to be able to speak to this process and the impact that it has. So thank all of you for the work that you're doing. Going off of kind of what Brian said, technically my title is instructional lead teacher, but essentially it is a multi-classroom leader. Everything you guys focused on, I have that impact. So as a teacher leader, I'm able to not only just focus on my kids that I have within my roster, but also being able to support teachers that I work with and their students. So it's very much the model that you guys talked about, is having a greater impact. Not only do I teach my students and I'm embedded into the curriculum, into the instructional practices, but then I also support teachers by observing and coaching, providing feedback, having professional learning communities where we talk about what are the best things to do for students. My career actually started off as a mentor teacher. So there was an educational prep program who brought in teachers who are interested in going into the profession. They're in grad school. And so she stayed with me the whole year and watched me model and practice. And I coached her and we taught together co-led instructional classes. And then she had the opportunity to become a teacher herself. And so that invested into the career, that invested in teacher attention, because her first year, she got the opportunity to work with a teacher rather than her first year just kind of taking it all by herself by trial and error. This role also has led me the opportunity to teachers who didn't get that opportunity for me to be able to support them and guide them through the practices. Many of you mentioned that COVID has changed education, and that cannot be far from the truth. The way that I taught 4 years ago, absolutely different. And if I wasn't still in the classroom, I wouldn't have the actual knowledge and understanding of what it takes to make that change for teachers. And so being able to have that multifaceted aspect and understanding has really elevated to be able to support teachers to promote student excellence. A part of that, just through mentorship and being an instructional leader, Teach Plus has really empowered me into being able to step into rooms that I never thought I could step into. This panel is an example. Being able to be here is a part of teacher leadership. And so being able to have that voice, whether it's in my campus, whether it's through my district, or going to the Capitol to advocate for teacher leaders, Teach Plus has been able to provide those opportunities and help me get empowered with being able to do that.
Thank you so much. So can I come back to a couple of issues that I want to bring out here. All of you can comment on this. We've done a lot of adding these pieces on top of the existing structure in the past. I think each of the models and the experience that you also just described actually shaking up what the school day looks like and how people work together and all of those different things. Maybe starting with Brent a little bit. So what's required that's different about schedules? You've talked about staffing, but about schedules and, you know, and pay and things like that. And then we'll sort of, and hear Yuri talk about it. And then Brian can kind of talk a little bit about how they thought about financial sustainability of all of these things so that we're not just plopping them on top with extra money.
Yeah, you nailed it. School schedules drive so much of this work. And when we talk about teams, it's really easy to say teams and think, oh, I have a PLC. We meet after school 1 day a week. Or we say that we have teams and we get margaritas on a Tuesday. We're the third grade team.
Right.
When we say teams, we actually mean that a collective set of educators with, and I think this is really important, shared collective autonomy, which is different than individual autonomy, right? It's trusting a group of educators to be able to execute on the core task of the work, which is like teaching and learning. And that at the core of that is really the schedule. And there are two things that I would say on this point. First, in our experience, you shouldn't do this unless you're able to figure out how to give educators enough time to actually work and plan and collaborate together. And that actually means that there may be some trade-offs. We've done some really good work with ERS on this. Thank you very much, Karen and David Rosenberg and others. So you've got to give teachers enough time in their schedules. And that becomes a bit of a scheduling conundrum in and of itself. How do you create more time for educators to be together? And then the second thing is that there are a few things that you just can't change in any school schedule, right? Like what time does lunch happen? Or there are particular specials that have to meet on a particular day or high school electives. But there are a lot of other things that we just assume that you have to be together for a particular period of time and a bell rings and like some sort of Pavlovian style, kids rotate to the next teacher, they're there all day and it's just like, oh, yep, it's 10 o'clock, so ELA is over, now we're starting math. That's kind of weird. And so instead, if you empower the educators to say, hey, you have a 3-hour block of time. I was a high school biology teacher. Sometimes I needed 3 hours to run a lab, not because it was like Tuesday and that's when I got double blocked, but because that's when we needed to do that. So in these models, we see educators collaborating with one another and they're trading time and they're saying, oh, what about this? Or they're bringing kids together around interdisciplinary or cross-disciplinary projects. So trade-offs in time in order to make this happen, teachers planning, and then let the teachers actually design the schedule that makes sense for them and their kids. Yuri can be here in part because he's part of a team, right? It's like school day right now.
Beautiful.
That's absolutely right. So if I may add, I'll give a very concrete example. As my role, as I mentioned earlier, I am teaching. And so it takes I challenge all administrative, all leaders to really be forward thinking when they are creating this type of schedule for their teacher leaders. So I am in high school as well. And to be very concrete, we have A days and B days. On A days, that is my leadership day. On my B days, I teach and I coach. I run the professional learning community meeting, right? So there are times where I have the time to be able to go in and coach my teachers and support them. I'm also able to support the administrative team and the initiatives they have. So it's really important for these leaders to talk to their teachers, to grab the teacher leader, sit down and have the conversation of where can we best use you in our campus to support our teachers and our students? Because it might be that at different campuses, at different districts, it doesn't look like my schedule. And that's why it's so important for these educational leaders to bring in teachers to lend that voice on what's best for students.
Great. Brian, can you summarize and bring us home on this one?
Yes, and maybe I'll say something about financial sustainability, which I'm also going to completely pile on the involved teachers point here. But financial sustainability is so important because teachers and students need these roles to continue as long as they're valuable, not go away because some grant went away. And so when we work with schools and opportunity culture, a key principle is 100% of the ongoing costs need to be covered by reallocating recurring school funds. And who's in the best position to determine that reallocation? It's ideal for it to be a school level team made up mostly of teachers. They know their school, they know their students. They can decide this is less valuable, this is more valuable. And so a couple of quick ideas here that most schools in opportunity culture use. One is schools tend to have a lot of vacancies in their classrooms every year. They tend to try to fill them no matter what, even if it's a long-term sub or an emergency hire. So instead, schools can save those vacancies, use the funds to pay teachers more for these new roles, including the teachers on the team in some cases, and add a paraprofessional or a teacher resident to the team who then can support students, especially with tutoring. So that's a recurring source that can be reallocated. The other one is schools are often spending funds in other ways to support teachers, like having an instructional coach or two. They don't need these positions anymore if they have multi-classroom leaders across the school. Those individuals may become multi-classroom leaders, but the position is free and can be used to pay for these costs. So there are lots of examples of this in these 500 schools. It can be done within recurring resources, and teachers are in the best position to decide how to do that.
Perfect. And Kira?
Just a quick note to build on what's already been shared. I was recently thinking about an example we have in Texas of a partnership we have with Harmony School District, where Teach Plus is entering into its 6th year partnering with Harmony Schools. We're literally working alongside Harmony's executive leadership team to develop the systems that elevate teacher voice and support principals in creating distributed leadership teams. And I think it's important to keep in mind that this work is about capacity development, right? And it's creating the capacity around leaders around teachers to understand how to build the systems and structures to really enable this. And it takes time, 6 years, right, of a partnership. This year, this includes partnering with their director of leadership development and their director of instruction to implement teacher leadership across 61 schools, serving 41,000 students. And what has been most striking to me about this rich example is that during the pandemic, right, and into this year, when you know, any number of areas of focus could have been distractions for this district. They actually doubled down on the partnership that they actually had with us aimed at distributing teacher leadership, because they saw that giving this agency and this leadership to teachers improved morale, it improved retention, it improved student success, and they actually saw it as a bet. And that was years and years of a relationship that we've been able to track and develop. So I just want to sort of add that notion as well.
I love that you added that point about how long this takes, because this is so important to the whole financial sustainability. We've had the same model for well over a century. It's not going to go. It's going to take time to reinvent and figure out how the systems and structures fit around that. And you know, we've talked just now about class and group size needing to shift in terms of finding trade-off, how we think about time, how we think about who can provide education and instruction to students and when. And we've talked also about the structure of compensation and the different roles so that we can differentiate all of those different things. So that's beautiful. I want to just end and turn it back to the funders and then open it to questions pretty quickly. But before I go, I just maybe want to just go around the group about sort of you know, and let's just try to be quick, and then our funders will respond. Is just like sort of, if you were to say, like, you know, just a couple challenges and opportunities in the next 3 to 5 years that we need to be really paying attention to as we do this work. Yeah, and just maybe I'll start in reverse order with Kira going, and then we'll go back around.
Oh, okay. So I'll be so brief, but I just think our primary goal is to keep investing in R&D and pilot programs, to keep making investments in teacher, you know, this is sort of the advice I guess I would give to funders about how they might support our efforts, which I think is important. Keep investing in pilot programs, make investments in teacher voice to help build public perception about the importance of this issue, and to continue to support the sort of necessary policy changes that are needed to eliminate the broader barriers and accelerate more opportunity to get closer to reimagining this profession.
Great. And Yuri, would you add?
Definitely. To add to what Kira was saying, I think it's super important that these spaces are inviting teachers in to be able to lend a voice, to build capacity, and more importantly, as Kira mentioned, being able to push for policy. We are currently, as teacher leaders, promoting the Teachers Lead Act. And the idea with that is to be able to create a sustainable program, right, that leverages teacher leaders in the classroom. And so I would challenge all of you all that within your state, within your community, that you look into the Teachers Lead Act and you share it with your representatives in your Congress, because this is one of the greatest ways to be able to promote teacher leadership.
Beautiful. Brent?
3 challenges. 1, all of the systems that exist are really situated for a one teacher, one classroom model.
Right.
That needs to change. That's from evaluation to student information systems, scheduling tools. 2, we need to get serious about data and research. And this is where together, I think we can learn a lot more. The fact that Brian and I are not using the same satisfaction instrument is probably a problem, and we're going to work on that, but we're not there yet. And the policy piece, I think, is really important. I think that there are a few policies that get in the way and a lot that could actually catalyze this work in really exciting ways if we figured that we built collective movement and momentum there. There are lots of things that are happening that are really exciting. We'll talk about that later.
Brian?
Just a second, other thoughts. I think the most important challenge right now is reaching more teachers and students with these models. And most kids and teachers are still in the one teacher, one classroom model. We need a lot more of this activity. And that's really a place for local funders in particular to come in, because you can help your school systems in your area make the transition. Once they make the transition, financially sustainable, but that change management process, getting from point A to point B, all the hard work of engaging teachers in that can be something you can support, and then it can really move this reach out to many more teachers and students.
Thank you. And I would just add to that one of the things that we get when we're working at a district level versus a school level is thinking about how this can scale. And so we try these, over history, we tried these pieces in 1 or 2 schools, but it's hard to spread because we haven't thought about all of these enabling conditions that Kara's been talking about. This one teacher, one classroom, everything, all the teacher contracts, all the ways we allocate resources to schools, everything is governed by that. And the work that we do at ERS is about sort of really rethinking how you can create a system of schools that look like this, which is key to equity. Because if you have these things happening in little pockets all over the district in slightly different ways, it doesn't actually change the overall profession in a lasting way. So with that, we're going to all come back together, but so let's all come on screen now and invite the funders to add any thoughts in response to this, and reflections on what you just heard in general, especially in response to the roles that philanthropy can play. But you've all been thinking about this a lot, like some things you want to highlight before we move into Q&A.
I can kick us off. I think in hearing all these wonderful providers talk about the work that they're doing in the field and what else still needs to get done, one thing I wrote down and circled and highlighted is how much time this takes. So thank you, Kara, for making sure that we underscored that. And the importance of building capacity through research and development as well as pilot work. And I appreciate, Brent, your point that we should be thinking about using similar instruments to understand what works. So I think that's a really important point that I'm hearing reflected back, and I would encourage funders to think about the same in terms of evidence building. I think I'm also left just thinking about what are some of the effective messages around differentiated staffing that will really resonate with the public and policymakers to create change. Excited to hear what Stephanie and Shane have to think as well.
Shane, Stephanie?
I'm happy to jump in. Two things I'm carrying away. One is this point that several of the panelists talked about in terms of the need to see more innovation, to get more teachers, support more teachers moving into these roles, and just get some of this work more broadly out there within schools. So as I think about the work that we did in Denver, we started our pilot with a notion that 12 schools were going to do it in the first year. We got 25 applications for that first year and said, okay, we're going to do 25 schools. The next year, similarly, we set a goal, we doubled that for the next year. It's once teachers and school leaders kind of see the potential of this model, I think there's a lot of opportunity. And then the second thing I would just build on is what you already talked about, which was the importance of local context as well. These are really solutions that are built for systems, for schools, the importance of engaging leaders and teachers in these solutions. I think it also, to Brian's point, just speaks to the importance and the potential partnerships between national funders and local funders around some of this work, because of the deep knowledge that local funders have around broader context and what's happening within individual school systems.
Yeah, the other thing, sorry, somebody answering, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to underscore Shane's last point there around local funders, and the Arizona Community Foundation literally helped us to build the first model in Phoenix, which then now has expanded to 50 schools, in large part because of exactly what Shane is describing, right? And that it was a local funder that got that work started, and then national funders as part of a larger picture that have helped us to broadcast the work more broadly. I just want to underscore that point.
The one thing that I would also push on, if you're a hammer, everything's a nail, is the policy space, because that's where we work. What I heard listening to this is like, oh my gosh, it's so complicated. That was the thing I was coming out. It's like, wow, this is way more complicated when everybody's talking about it. And there are policy barriers that can stifle this innovation. And, respect to all funders, but funders can be really reluctant to get into the policy space. It can be mucky and messy, and it's just really important. This is not going to spread across the country if we don't have some policy changes. So I would press a little bit on funders to think a little bit about what they could do in the policy space.
Yeah, and just to add on that local funding piece and Brent's comment as well, it's, I'm remembering in one district where we sent out maybe an unfortunate survey looking at priorities for spend, and one of them was, should we spend more on teacher teaming and planning? Guess what? It ranked the absolute lowest thing that parents wanted to spend money on because of this issue that Kira was raising, is like, we have to build understanding, create the messaging around that this is what enables teachers to plan their lessons, to customize, to reach students, to figure out what students need, look at the data and all of those things. So local funders and local community partners have a huge role to play in advocating how we get the best expertise to the teaching of reading, and how we need to organize schools in order to get our best teachers working with the students who need it most. And this is not going to just be reducing class size and things like that. So it's an important piece to really engage folks at the local level to work on this.
Yeah, and Karen, this has been mentioned, but just to reiterate it, and Stephanie spoke to this a bit, this work does require R&D to develop effective and scalable teacher leadership models. To Stephanie's point about the complexity of it, it requires legitimate investment in R&D, which many times governments are not uniquely positioned to do, right? A different panel for a different day about why that is. But for today, it's like, we know those are limitations. And so there's a powerful role, I know, for Teach Plus. The Schusterman Foundation, the Joyce Foundation, Overdeck Foundations have all been integral. And even Yuri's example about this, the Teachers Lead Act, which we're all very excited about, that has recently just been, I think endorsed by the, Hispanic, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and is starting to get real momentum, would not have been possible, right, without philanthropic support to help us, start to support the teachers who help to craft and help to support that work alongside Representative Gallego in Arizona and Senator Lujan in New Mexico. So I just want to name how critical the role of philanthropists are in advancing this. It's just incredible.
Mm-hmm. And could I turn it to Brian for a second on this topic, in the sense of so it's R&D that's based on existing research. We're not just driving stuff out of the blue, and we're not experimenting on our teachers and children at this moment of huge need, right? And we're not, and we're engaged in this in a continuous improvement kind of way. And maybe Brian, you would you've been sort of really a pioneer here thinking about that. Just talk a little bit about that blending of starting with research, doing innovation, and then always improving it and saying okay, how do we message that? How do you actually organize to do it?
That's so important. And this work all starts with the enormous research base showing that teachers are the single most important factor in student learning, and yet only a fraction of kids have access to the most effective teachers. So that's the fundamental research base that we're all building on, I think, here. But the overtime learning is so important. I just have to credit the Overdeck and Schusterman investments in our work that have been paying for that over years, so that we've been able to look at the student learning data every year, look at the implementation data, how are schools actually doing this well and not so well, what correlates with student learning, what we survey the teachers, what are they saying, how does that correlate with student learning? And then every year we're able to make a round of changes in the designs. And that's one value that any school joining one of our networks over time has, is that the accumulated learning that wouldn't happen without these investments and without the discipline to learn and change. We can always get better.
That's great. Would you add anything, Brett? Perfect. Okay. So this is the moment when we're going to open it up to questions and answers if they're there, and if not, I've been keeping notes on things that would be really interesting to keep talking about. So what do we have? Yes, so Q&A. So, okay. We are I'm seeing a fair number of questions actually wanting to get more specific about the sorts of policy changes that need to be undertaken in order to enable these models.
I can kick
Great.
us off as a starting
Great.
point, and I'm sure others will build. So for example, Teach Plus policy fellows have been a part of coalition efforts to successfully advocate for legislation in states like Indiana and Texas that specifically create career ladders, right, for educators, effective mentorship programs, strategic compensation for outstanding educators. All of those are obviously legislative, bills that we've advocated for. In Texas, as a part of a major school funding overhaul legislation, I believe like HB 3, the teacher incentive allotment provides schools with up to $32,000 additional dollars for master teachers in high poverty schools, which they can then use both to provide higher salaries for outstanding teachers and create teacher leadership roles, right? So Yuri's advocacy, for example, in Teach Plus, in the fellowship, played a critical role in making that happen. In addition, I think a part of HB 3 included a mentor program allotment that provides districts with funds to run high quality mentorship programs for new teachers and the leadership of excellent experienced teachers. So hopefully that's like just a couple of concrete examples that we're seeing across states.
Yeah, beautiful. Brent, Brian, Yuri.
There are, I don't want to use the word barriers because what I want to say, and I said it in the writing chat, is that look, districts and schools can do a lot right now, even without policy change. So I would urge any district and school leader listening here not to think, well, I got to wait for the legislature to do something before I can do anything on this front. So I don't want to say barriers, but there are things that make it harder. Rigid class size limits make it harder to change into these teams. Rigid funding systems that don't let you move money from one place to the other make it harder. I don't want to say barrier because you can work around these things in many cases, but policymakers can really get out of the way and let innovators do more work more easily.
One thing that I would add in the in the Arizona context is this idea that we actually are seeing increases in teacher enrollment in institutions in Arizona, which is bucking the national trend. And in part, I'd like to think that it's the next education workforce, but in reality, I think that it's like the governor is providing last dollar scholarships for anyone that wants to be an educator and commit to teaching in Arizona. I mean, it's called the Arizona Teacher Academy, ATA, and it's attracting a lot of people because it's changing the value proposition of what it means to become an educator. Right? Like, so this is an awesome policy, but this book doesn't go away, right? It's the first year teacher survival guide. It's like 550 pages thick. Like that was it hitting the floor. This is bananas, right? Like we have not created a new way of thinking about sheltering our rookie teachers, right? And so this is why these things can be coupled, right? We're talking about new ways to bring pipelines of ideally, hopefully, please, diverse educators into the profession, but you can't just bring them in and do the same thing that we've been doing for like 150 years. That's weird.
Just to add on to that, Brent, thank you for holding up that book. You just brought back flashbacks. But more importantly, I think as a teacher, having my teacher hat on, the key word that comes to me is differentiation.
Mm-hmm.
We preach that in our classrooms for our students. We preach that to our teachers. Know your students, know their data, know what they're capable of doing to differentiate your lessons to that. I think that is something that we really need in the profession of education. The teacher role should no longer look the same that it did 5-10 years ago. One, because of COVID. Two, because we want to advance in the profession. It shouldn't just be one person standing there working with 30 kids. I have immensely grown in my profession with this role. But more than anything, I've learned that I love being a classroom teacher. I could have stepped out as a classroom teacher and gone straight into instructional coaching, but then it wouldn't be peer-to-peer learning. And the most valuable part about that is that as an instructional coach, I learn from the teachers as well. I implement the practices. And I think that's what builds more of the teacher coalition together, knowing that you're being coached and you're led by someone that's also doing it too. So really thinking of intentionally, each state is going to look different. Each school is going to look different. Each district is going to look different. And it's going to be so important for us to use data points that we have, qualitative data from students and teachers of what can be the most impactful change and move to promote the profession.
Beautiful. I've got a couple of lines of questioning I want to follow up on. One is about how, this linking the policy actually to a weird thing. So there's a whole set of policies that govern how we can use time. And policies and rules and contract regulations, how many minutes to which thing have to be, those are in state regulations. You have to spend, if we need to spend 2 hours on reading, but we also are required to spend 45 minutes on 5 other things plus 20 minutes a day on such other things, it makes some things pretty challenging. So there's all sorts of constraints around time. And then there's all within the school day, and then it's how we define learning time outside of the school day. And so I'm really interested in reflections about, especially for this group of folks participating in our webinar, how these differentiated staffing models can embrace outside providers of reading service or other kinds of instructing or learning opportunities into this, and the role that teaching teams might play in that and how it fits into the model. Kind of a strange question, but I think it really does open up the box.
I'm happy to kick us off, and then Brian, I would love to invite you into the conversation as well, because I think you know this research pretty well. At Overdeck Family Foundation, we're also thinking differently about how all adults in the student's orbit can really impact the work that we're talking about today. So not within my portfolio, but some of our other investments include tutoring providers, including Saga, Upchieve, and On Your Mark. And we found that a lot of different adults can offer that one-to-one supportive relationship with great impact, both in and out of school. So I encourage Brian, I know that you're thinking about some of the research that has come out since, and potentially thinking about the paraprofessionals, also important adults in the orbit of students and the impact that they can have on that achievement.
Yeah, and having a team with a team leader just puts a school in a much better position to marshal whatever resources there are available to focus on student learning. And tutors would be one possibility there. Brent can probably talk about community educators as another strand of, so I'll kick it over to him in a second, but I just want to put on the idea that the team with a team leader is a platform that a lot of whatever it is that's going to work for kids is much more likely to be put out into schools and happen with high effectiveness in that kind of setting. Brad, I don't know what you'd add to that.
I just think we leave a ton of talent on the table. And if you ask educators, you ask building level leaders the question, who do you have? The answer is that they have a lot.
Yeah.
But it turns out that sometimes we don't create or we feel hemmed in by the systems and the powers that be, the way that we've configured jobs, right? We've got a ton of retired educators. We've got a ton of people that have left the classroom, maybe even temporarily to raise family, that they're not going to come back for 180 days a year at like 10, 15, 20 hours a day, but like they might come back for like 2 hours right after drop off, right? And be an incredible literacy facilitator. We do a really bad job of aligning, we create like cul-de-sacs, not pathways, right? And so imagine that you could upskill a set of para-educators around being literacy accelerators or digital learning facilitators that actually banked and counted toward a degree, a professional degree in education, if you so wanted. Imagine that you had high school CTE, career and technical education, young students that are thinking about becoming teachers, but don't let them like sit around and talk about theory. Bring them into the elementary school next door. We're doing this, it's super cool, right? And that they're actually part of these teams. And to Brian's point, the moment that you disrupt the one teacher, one classroom model, and you're thinking as a team, how you might deploy adults differently, leveraging data, leveraging everything that we know about kids and their relationships and like what makes them tick, right? And you've got an orchestrator in a teacher leader, that's just so much more powerful than trying to do that at 3.5 million classrooms across the United States. It's weird. It's a lot of things that are weird.
Great. So we're nearing the end of time. This poll does not, we were warned, it does not meet. It means we have 7 more minutes to go. So if you've got other questions you want to make sure we address, please pop them in there. I want to turn to a question just to make it, really clear. How do these models help us with expanding the pipelines into teaching? And how do you make that more systematic and scalable as you do that?
I like to start that one off. So personally, it used to be where I'm either a teacher or an administrator. I might be a coach. This allows for flexibility for me to be able to, as Minnie mentioned, you find the strength of your teacher and use that. It could be instructional, it could be operational, systemic, like whatever it is. And so now I have a broad range of areas to where I can jump to and still stay in the field, still stay in the classroom. To create that sustainability, that's where I would leave it up to the funders and you guys. Just keep us in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. And what about sort of pipelines into teaching? Yeah, and making that systematic, Brian or Brent or Kara?
Two quick thoughts. So one, when we talk about pipelines, we often think we're going to keep the job the same. The slots are what they are. How can we get more people into these things that we already have? No, I think Brent would say that's weird. We need to think, what's a different job, a different environment, a different culture, and then how will that be more attractive? Secondly, these teams can have places on them for teacher candidates. So that's a great place for a teacher candidate to come in, get a lot of actual teaching experience, have the leadership of a teacher leader and the other team members, and learn on the job and get paid for that in their senior year in college or their first year in a master's degree, and then become a teacher.
And I just want to add to that is that it also provides us a way of seeing who might be fabulous teachers. We have this thing that we've analyzed a lot in districts where tenure is virtually automatic. It's not something that folks actually look at. You go in, you get in the door and you get to stay in the door, especially in a high needs school or district. This is a way of actually enabling some really important screening of, who might be great candidates and actually encouraging folks who might not think about it to come into teaching because you've gotten to see this. I have got a cool question.
Karen, can I just add to that, because I think this is a real passion point for me, is what the intersection of these two worlds looks like. And I absolutely agree with the point you're making. I actually came into education from the legal world, right? And as I then jumped into the world at DPS and understood kind of the way in which we thought about talent within schools, the notion that you would have a newly minted lawyer come in and run jury trials on the first, it was totally crazy, right? Like that was, and any other knowledge profession, any other profession that requires you to build knowledge skills in order to grow and improve, you would never structure individual roles or teams that way. And so I just think there is this tremendous, I think it helps to solve the teacher shortage type issues in a few different ways. One is specifically the way that you talked about, Karen, which is we've got like all these different roles now. So you can start as a high school student, like dipping your toe in understanding. You can then spend a year as a resident in a classroom, like starting to build your skills. Then you're on a team. Maybe after a couple years, you're overseeing, you're starting to support new teachers as they're coming in as kind of a mentor. And then you move up to a team lead role. There's just all these places to start to identify talent, not only for teacher roles, but for leader roles as well, right? So people get real experience leading groups of people. And then the other two things I would say is, some of the biggest obstacles we're seeing as we think about attitudes towards the teaching profession are one, the job itself and the lack of support, and the isolation of the job. People want to work on teams. They want to be around other people. They want to feel kind of collective ownership. And so these kinds of models get at that point. It just makes it a much more fun job and a much more interesting one. And the last piece is compensation. And I think that is an important part of this is that we saw the opportunities to elevate kind of teacher roles for your most talented teachers as a chance to pay those teachers more as well. So it really, created these opportunities for teachers to build compensation over time, which many of those college students thinking about teaching as a career are looking at their fellow students and understanding they're moving off the path where they can do that and want those kind of opportunities for themselves as well. So just think there are a lot of kind of short-term and long-term opportunities to address some of those issues.
That is beautiful, and it's taking us to the end of our time. A couple of questions that we didn't get to, so we need another panel. People are wanting to talk about virtual learning and how that plays into this, and how that enables things, and then how do the economics of this all work out? If we're going to pay teachers more, how do these models let us pay teachers more? And I would argue that they absolutely do. So check out all of our material and help us understand that. And I'm turning it over to Sarah to bring us home.
If it were up to me, we would stick around for another 90 minutes so we could wrestle with all that and more. Thank you so much, Karen. Amazing moderation. And thank you to our entire panel, to our funders, Stephanie Banchero, Irene Chen, and Shane Spalton, and to our incredible innovators and educators today, Brian Hassel, Yuri Diana Lewis, Brent Maiden, Kira Orange-Jones. Such an amazing conversation with so many insights and advice about how we can build the capacity of our teachers, but then really break down barriers so that we can tap into and fully leverage the power and potential of this incredible workforce. Thank you to all of you who joined us today. I hope you're leaving with as many insights and ideas as I gathered about ways that you can invest in and advance differentiated staffing and teacher leader efforts as a part of your work with and in support of schools. I hope you'll join us again later on today. This is why we can't continue for another 90 minutes. We've got another webinar scheduled this afternoon starting at 3 p.m. Eastern, co-sponsored by Parent-Teacher Home Visits, exploring how this evidence-based, high-impact family engagement model can strengthen relationships between schools and families. And then as you see on the screen, we've got another exciting doubleheader next week. I've dropped registration links into the chat so you can make plans to join us for that, and the session that we're hosting and co-sponsoring with Foundations Inc. to kick off the month of October. More informative and engaging sessions planned throughout the remainder of the year. I hope you'll join us for more of them, but thank you again to our amazing panel and to all of you. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.